I'd like to wish you all a welcome to this webinar series, the first in hopefully a part of a long series, depending on the interest level and what topics you'd like to see us cover. Today, it's really a top-level discussion, a top-down kind of discussion around network automation, where to start, and what to watch out for. Very happy to be joined by our partner, People Driven Technology. So Matt McPherson is on with me. Matt is VP of Technology and Strategy at People Driven. Matt, if you could give a quick welcome and intro.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mike, and glad to be here today. So, I'm Matt McPherson. I'm the VP of Technology and Strategy at People Driven, which effectively means I'm the chief nerd here. So I get to have a lot of fun with our clients and geek out from time to time. But here at People Driven, I have overall responsibility for our technical vision and strategy, our go-to-market, and I also lead our pre-sales teams. I've worn a lot of different hats over my career. I spent a number of years at Cisco, helped them launch the Nexus series of product. If you remember that back in the day, I co-authored a couple Cisco Press titles on the topic as well. But I also spent some time on the customer side. I had responsibility for some very large enterprise networks, and like to use my experience these days to help our clients here at People Driven.
Thank you very much, Matt. Great to have you on with me. And I'm Michael Haugh. I'm VP of Product Marketing here at Gluware. I've been with Gluware 6 years, so I've been helping a lot of customers start their journey and accelerate their journey in network automation. Like Matt, I have a long history as a practitioner, starting my career at IBM and operating very large global networks and enterprise networks, and roles from everywhere from operations to network design and network architecture. And then I spent quite a few years testing and certifying products and new technologies for deployment into the network. And I kind of transitioned into working for test companies like IXIA and Spirent as part of my career path there. And then I really got excited about software-defined networking and how you could control the network with software, and ultimately working in standards bodies and other organizations led me towards looking for a company that was on the cutting edge of that. And I found Gluware 6 years ago. So happy to be with you today. And like Matt, we both share the mindset of really taking things from an educational standpoint and really trying to educate and arm you as much as possible. And that will be our goal here in this series. We did put a poll up because we want to understand a little bit of context about where you're at from the folks on. So for those of you live, you can click the poll results or click on the poll there for us. Those watching after the fact here recorded, we appreciate you consuming this material. So I see a pretty good balance across the board here. About some folks are still getting learning and getting started and trying to understand what's possible. A couple are working on the business case, a very important component of getting your organization on board with moving towards automation and taking it seriously. We have others that are working on building a network automation internally. So let's dive into all of those things. We'll go ahead and end the poll and get started with the session here. Let's see if I click share results. Hopefully, you all can see the poll and a little bit of it. Not a deep amount of participation. Apparently, folks already think this webinar is helpful, so we appreciate appreciate that right out of the gate here. So let's get moving here. Just from a housekeeping standpoint, again, you can interact with us via the chat. You can also submit questions. Matt and I in our prep said we like to take questions along the way. We will try to have some time at the end for the remaining Q&A. We'll be trying to take a look at that and answer some things along the way, because we would like to hear what you're thinking and understand it as we go here instead of saving it all towards the end. So with that, a quick intro here in terms of an agenda. I'd like Matt to take a few minutes just to introduce you to People Driven, and I'll take a slide or two and just talk about who Gluware is and what we do, so you have a perspective of our organizations and what we're trying to do here. And then the meat of the presentation is around selecting your automation use cases and how to kind of get your organization on board with moving forward with that. And then I would call the age-old question in network automation is build versus buy. So we have some interesting insight to share with you and some things to think about as you're kind of wrestling with some of these choices in your organizations. We came up with the top 5 things to avoid. So we've all been down the path or seen companies make quite a few mistakes, and let's try to avoid those things, and we'll call those out. And then when you start thinking about building a business case and justifying investment or justifying training or whatever you're going to, consulting, however you're going to move forward in network automation, looking at calculating an ROI and building a business case that has obviously, financial impact to your organization. So that's the agenda for today. We originally thought, we can knock this out in 40 minutes and leave extra time. In prep, I think Matt and I talked for about an hour and 20 minutes. So it could be, we could definitely fill the hour. So with that, Matt, maybe give a quick intro of People Driven for us.
Yeah, no, thank you, Michael. And I'm very happy and thankful to be here today representing People Driven Technology, and appreciate all of you that could join along with us. And looking forward to telling you a little bit more about who we are. So People Driven Technology is a modern hyper-growth technology integrator. We're based in the Midwest and we serve the Midwest. Our story really isn't one of glitz and glamour. We're deeply focused on enterprise networking, hybrid cloud user experience, and cybersecurity. Beyond that, we have a dedicated cybersecurity practice. We truly believe in this day and age that security is an all-encompassing thing for our clients. Our philosophy is one that's pretty simple. It centers around, you guys, our clients. We believe that by taking a client-first approach, it allows us to be best of breed. As Michael said earlier, with the advent of software-defined solutions and technologies, many of these require a very complex deployment and a lot of tuning and those sorts of things. So our client-first approach really allows us to extract and provide true technical outcomes for our clients. We're nimble, we're flexible, we're very easy to do business with. We've focused on hiring and building this business by attaining the best of the best. We are a technology first company and an engineering led organization. So a lot of our engineers have expert level certifications across the various OEMs that we support. And I guess I'll leave the People Driven commercial here by saying that we are just absolutely obsessed about our work, but we're even more passionate about the relationships that it brings us. Technology is complex; it gets more complex every day, but great relationships aren't, and they shouldn't be. And from a People Driven standpoint, again, we appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you all today, and we're here and in business to help. So. Michael,
thanks so much, Matt. And just that intro, you made me think about why you guys are such a great partner and why we align so well. Is that we have similar take in that. A very quick kind of intro to Gluware in that we're a privately held company based out of Sacramento. We serve kind of the global 2000. Really is our the large enterprise our key marketplace. Our product can kind of go down market, and we have MSPs and things that use our product as well, but we're really kind of targeted the enterprise. We're not really sold into service providers or others. And that's an important distinction when you think about network automation. So that could be a huge tangent. We go into service provider automation versus enterprise, but not really the focus of this session. Where what we've developed is, and what we work on and what we're passionate about is multi-vendor, multi-domain automation orchestration. We started our company being a single vendor kind of product. And if you're a single vendor product and kind of single function, you may solve one problem, pain point in the marketplace, but you're really one dimensional. And I think as we had, success with that, as soon as we had some success in solving one problem, customers wanted to take that technology and apply it to, multiple vendors, multiple domains, and really expand it. So we followed what the customer's demand was and moved towards that. We've had a lot of great recognition in the industry from Gartner and others. We, as I mentioned, that being multi-vendor, we have over 40 operating systems supported by our product, and with that, we have extremely strong partners and technical partners that we work with in the industry. And we're well funded and recently backed by Bain Capital. So we're a Bain portfolio company with a round of investment we closed in Q3 of last year. That's really allowed us to take off and expand and accelerate on product initiatives that we had to serve our customer base. So one more quick slide in that, I already mentioned a number of things in that we're multi-vendor and multi-domain. But when you think about Gluware, think about, software control of your network and software control across the LAN, WAN, data center, and even expanding into cloud architectures. We differentiate by being intent-based, and that really is driven through an orchestration engine that is intelligent, has intelligence about the network. So we're not just pushing, load and pray type pushing changes to the network without understanding its current state. It's really looking at the current state and looking at the design or the policy you're looking to implement on your network, and doing that through software and through software control. And it's not just day zero, it's about ongoing optimization, tuning, keeping the network compliant, and taking or enabling CI/CD approach. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in this presentation, but around continuous integration, continuous deployment, kind of best practices for software. How can we help and apply it to the network? And something that we've introduced to the network as well is around process automation. And we'll get into that. So with that, let's jump into the very first segment here around automated use cases and where to start. So when I was thinking about this, I was kind of replaying in my mind some recent meetings I've been in, fortunately back to being some in person, but obviously a lot of them are on Zoom calls or WebExes or what have you. And one of the first things you do is you kind of go around the room and talk to people about what they care about and where their interest is, because that really ultimately drives, the use cases. If you have 10 people in the room, you could have 10 different perspectives and 10 different ownership areas. Some folks are focused on the WAN or the data center, or some are rolling out SD-WAN or cloud. And it's really difficult to have a specific conversation or get into it without, you're going to lose the interest of everyone else in the room. And, so as you start to kind of zone in on, your use cases, you got to kind of start to look across and have a conversation around, are there categories of use cases? Is it moves, adds, changes? Is it audits? Is it software upgrades? What are the kind of key things, and how are your people and your organization spending their time? What are the things that are being done manually that really need to be automated that are bubbling up to the top? So Matt, when you engage with customers and you're just starting the conversation and having that discovery, what are a couple of the top things that generally kind of come out, and when you're trying to help them or consult them into like best practices and approaches to automation?
Yeah, Mike, great question. And I think you mentioned kind of the first thing that's top of mind to a lot of our clients today. And that's COVID, right? And living in this post-COVID world, right? I can't coin it as my own phrase, but a good friend of mine, said a term that has resonated very well with me and us here at People Driven, and that's, COVID-inspired designs. The state of the supply chain, the state of change in the workplace, switching to hybrid work and kind of reinventing things. I think first and foremost has caused a lot of folks to sort of reevaluate, their networks and the role that they're playing. And there's been a huge impetus towards things like multi-vendor, right? And from a domain and use case standpoint, that's really where we're seeing a lot of the automation discussion, start today, as folks, may have a singular platform that's managing a part of the infrastructure well, and are looking to, better support a model where it's not just focused on one particular OEM.
Yeah, Matt, we've seen those same things. And, the impact of the pandemic did things like change network data flows, right? You have a lot more VPN or remote workers. You potentially had to change QoS because your traffic patterns are different. Like you mentioned, the supply chain impacts. You have to optimize your network and get a longer life out of the network, and possibly do those upgrades and cleanups that you weren't planning on because that you thought that equipment was going away. So there's a lot of impact, and that's a great point in that, it's sometimes there's a bigger theme or something happening within an organization, and to try to bring out what that is a key thing. So in a build out of this, as I was thinking, you kind of have those domain specific conversations, then you jump into like, what are the actual use cases? And this is just some of the ones that I hear, let's say more often than not, around needing to have an accurate inventory, needing to be able to audit for security or compliance purposes, being able to monitor for change, which also plays into troubleshooting. understanding how they can identify security vulnerabilities. Matt, you said this from the beginning, like how security is like in the top, either the top one or it's always in the top three of organizational objectives. And understanding PCERTs are Cisco security advisories, and CVEs come from NIST around vulnerabilities. And understanding if you're exposed to those vulnerabilities and having a plan of action to respond to those vulnerabilities. That's generally one of the very top ones that we hear.
I would second that, Mike. And security is paramount in probably every conversation we have. And I think the network is playing much more of a critical role for our clients today, right? If you go to the cloud, right, you've got to have a network to get to the cloud, right? These changes and shifts in sort of customer environments, I think, place more impetus on the network, and certainly place more impetus on security and compliance, right? How do I know I'm secure? Maybe I can look today, but I might have to task a team of engineers to go out and log into each device and come back and say, yeah, we're good to go, right? But what about tomorrow, or what about next week, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned code, a great point, right? As OS updates come out, how do I know that I'm not exposed? Hopefully we don't get into a log4shell version 2 at some point in time, but there'll always be another one of those too.
Yeah.
So I think a great point there on the security side.
Yeah, and OS upgrades, you hit a big one there, because it's a painful process. There's a lot of steps to run through in an operating system upgrade. And when you have to do it within a change window, let's say to minimize downtime, or we have pharmaceuticals that don't want to take down a production floor where they're producing cancer-saving treatments or COVID vaccines, right? We literally are working with these companies doing those kinds of things. And so you don't want to interrupt operations and production. And so you need to do it within change windows that are sometimes kind of non-existent. So, those are things.
Sorry, Mike. We both love to talk, right? So I'm sure the audience is going to get a lot of our content today from that standpoint. But I think you mentioned another key one, right? One of our largest customers, when they do have a change window, it's jammed with a bunch of other infrastructure groups, and the network needs to not go down, right? So, imagine running a large enterprise network for, $100 billion organization. You get into a change window to actually go do something, and you're told, hey, you can do that, but we can't have any downtime.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things I was recommending from the start or in the beginning of this conversation is try to come up with areas of, let's say, agreement, even across domain. Like when you look at across, no matter I'm talking data center or WAN, you need to be able to inventory your network. And that inventory includes understanding end of life, end of sale, maybe your vendor's support contract status, your vulnerabilities. Inventory can mean a lot of things, but you need to be able to pull that data. And Matt, you brought up a good point, which is a lot of times companies kick off projects and people go off and do these inventory assessments for months or weeks. And then by the time they're completing it, the data is stale, right? The network's always changing. So if you can automate the ability to pull your inventory and capture that data in real time, it really is tremendous value to the organization. And it helps with things like the second bullet around maintaining compliance. Gluware has had a lot of success in highly regulated industries that have to abide by HIPAA or have to be compliant to PCI DSS or any of the other standards, Sarbanes-Oxley, the SOX compliance. There's a lot of compliance out there that impact your network layer, your records, the way you document change to the network. And, all of that can be, if you're out of compliance, it could cost your organization a lot of money. And, failing an audit can be embarrassing as well. That tends to drive a lot of top priorities. I mentioned moves as changes. That's kind of fundamental. But if you're assessing the time of how your people, your operational staff are spending time and to move or change, or let's say roll out 802.1x or, update ACLs is like incredibly time consuming. That's something that you really need to look at automating. So sometimes it's like assessing how time is spent and prioritizing in that way. I mentioned, when we think of these domains, sometimes people think, well, my domain is separate from their domain, but we know applications right across all of these domains. And often when you're provisioning a service or a capability, there are changes required across this. So if I can make a change quickly in my data center, but the WAN team is taking 2 or 3 weeks, that ultimately I can't enable that application on the network until the network and everything is done across domain. So you really want to start to think about it end to end, start to have some leadership that breaks down silos and has some commonality to help do that. And that ties into the last two around end-to-end process automation and integrating, where even if you have, let's say, islands of automation or islands of technology, beginning to integrate via API and be able to have process automation in that as well. So, Matt, what are your thoughts? How are people moving from like task-oriented thinking to process-oriented thinking when it comes to automation?
Yeah, and I like this framework a lot, Mike. When we start to think about it, right? And I think I'll get to your question here, but I'll kind of start by talking about some of the challenges, right? And that's sometimes when we start thinking about network automation, we tend to boil the ocean. We look at something like this and say, I need to check all of these boxes,
do it
right?
all,
and
right.
we get so hyper focused, and there is a lot of we could draw a bunch of lines to each one of these little things on the slide here, because there is a lot of dependencies from one thing to another. But I think it's important to look at the slide in totality, right? And start with kind of the goals, right? To your point, how do we get going, right? What are the pain points? What are maybe some initiatives? And we have a great customer actually, that gets a lot of mandates about how they need to run their network. What are some things that I need to do because of where the business is moving? Map those goals out first, right? And then work backwards from there. And I know as we get in and talking about a couple of the subsequent slides, we'll talk about some of the steps and crawl, walk, run, right? But again, I'd say don't overthink it, right? Don't jump in big and try to check every box, and make sure you're very goal oriented, with your process.
Yeah, I second that. So I'm going to jump in and just build out the slide in the just due to time. I don't want to take too much on this, but I want to talk about the Gluware approach, and this ties into what Matt was saying pretty nicely, in that if you look at all the things you want to do and you make this project this unbelievably big project, you may get hung up in just the getting started. And one of the things that's really ideal is to highlight some of the things that are of the highest value to your organization, and look at achieving them first, build confidence, build a proof point, get a return on investment already, and then land and expand or build off that. And so I'm going to annotate a little bit on this, because something very interesting when you think about automation is with Gluware, really here down is automating the read only, automating inventory, automating audit, automating config drift, the ability to automate troubleshooting. These are taking things that you do manually or can do manually on a CLI or through a web UI, and really getting those things automated. Because when in our case, when you have a suite of applications like Gluware with these are our no code app suite, you have device manager, you can execute a network discovery, and then you can have a device discovery, and then you can take all that data and make data-driven decisions. So, and like what Matt was saying, when you have the data and you can then look at it and make a decision about something that's going to be the most impactful choice, that's going to really help you drive that. One quick example is, you run your inventory and you find out you had really poor standardization of your operating system, the operating systems that are running in your network. And as such, you have inconsistencies of your features, you have different bug exposure, you have even security vulnerabilities. And so with the data that, again, in Gluware, you could either see that visually in the dashboard, or you could build reports with Data Explorer. But the very next step oftentimes is automating your operating system upgrades, getting to a good state. Because if you looked at most of that list on the previous slide, it's a lot about move, add changes of configuration state. We always think automate, config, change. In fact, that's what I usually think, because automation of old was primarily scripts that implemented change. You want to really think about automating, your inventory and your auditing and things like that. And that's the other one is around, like security audits. You can, if you automate CIS based audits, you can be constantly looking at your network to see if you're ever failing a well-known security practice, right? And then by the amount of failures you have, you can now define your policy here to implement in an automated way to keep your network in policy. And then you can even get fancy by, when audit fails, automatically remediate and implement policy and start to tie these things together. So Gluware with a suite of applications gives you entry points. Like we had a pharma that had to redesign QoS on their global WAN. So they're really trying to get right to here. We had, a bank fail an audit. They had to do their upgrades. That they had to get to this one first. So there's different entry points, but being able to kind of move up the stack and do things and get quick wins, and then add or layer in complexity or expand domains or expand vendors is kind of the progression. And then we get into what I think are kind of the most fun things that are some of the biggest business value is automating processes with our network RPA app. You can literally drag and drop process automation, so you can build process automation with no code. And then we have API integrations with the most common things, either custom or pre-built, where you can integrate with API. So Matt, what are your thoughts when you think, entry points to automation and the progression of it?
Yeah, I like two words that you've thrown out, Mike. State and intent, right? You can't deliver intent without state. And as a network engineer, we've long struggled with state, right? So I think the best starting point, right, is realizing that, hey, to your point, automation can really help me understand my network. Hey, I've got to decommission a DNS server and I have 1,000 network devices. Where is that DNS server called out in the config, right? I'm trying to figure out where a host is because there's some security event that's associated with it. Where is that, right? I've long said that there's no silver bullets in our industry, right? I think Gluware is close, right? It's really close, because I'll kind of jump to the top, and we've seen some of our clients leverage RPA in amazing ways, right? And so I think the real power here from a Gluware standpoint and a journey perspective, right, is that we mentioned crawl, walk, run earlier, right? You're taking steps along the way progressively to get to your journey, right? There's always going to be some other destination in sight, right? But the further you progress, the more powerful the automation becomes, and the more integral it is to you and how you operate day to day, right? It allows you to focus on some better things than logging into 100 different routers or switches.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one thing Gluware produced, in that kind of showcasing our capabilities. But what I encourage customers to do, or prospects, when I'm doing discovery, is to build the map of their own network. When you think of like this down being your network infrastructure, what vendors do you have in your CLI driven infrastructure, where you're primarily interacting with these things via CLI? What are you rolling out or looking at that is API driven? So it's primarily web page, or it's a programmatic interface. And then what clouds are you going to? Are you have a multi-cloud strategy? Is your network team getting involved in cloud yet? Is it just your app team? Do you have private cloud? And then, I like to understand too, like where are you at from an O&A orchestration and automation? I use the phrase O&A now because it's used within the ONUG working group for orchestration automation. But it's like, what do you have here now? Is it mostly manual? When you think about your network automation journey, I normally three starting points. One is mostly manual, right, where they don't really have much of anything from a true automation. Second is a lot of legacy. So there are products that have been around for 20 plus years that automate in unintelligent ways. And, it's better than nothing in some cases. But at the same time, when you implement a change without intelligence, that's when it can cause you an outage, and maybe worse than not having it. And the third has been, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
I was just saying the third is the build your own, which is, the vendors have been telling you got to make your network engineers be Python programmers and really kind of, build it. But go ahead, jump in, Matt.
No, I was going to say you brought up the big bad word of the day, right? Legacy, right? Because we'll get to talking about tech debt as we go along here. I think this slide represents a lot of logos. And, that's another big thing from an automation standpoint is that, we don't have to just look at automating things that are CLI driven, right? I can't right click a VNet in Microsoft Azure and click a button that says export to AWS, right? If I'm an NXOS guy, spent a good chunk of my career at Cisco, all that NXOS knowledge means nothing when I'm now operating an ACI environment. And I say those examples to just kind of illustrate how dynamic, really the world we live in is today, right? And how important automation is, when we're looking at all of the different facets, right? We were talking, it's like, the job of a network engineer these days is massive, right? You're dealing with a pond that's a mile wide and an inch deep and expected to know everything there is to know about each one of those little pieces and parts, right? And when you're thinking about automation and getting into that journey, right? Having a platform there that can help relieve you of some of that mundane burden and get you standards and get you down that path, I think is really helpful. And I'd say too, right, I think I like how this slide is laid out, because I think a lot of some of the more initial failures as sort of network automation was becoming mainstream were driven that, back to that boil the ocean approach, right? When I'm automating infrastructure or servers or, rollouts, right? Let's automate the network parts too. And that didn't work for a lot of people, right? And so I'm glad the industry overall has recognized the need for true network automation. And while there's a lot of tie-ins and you can see the arrows back and forth, right? Network automation and that intent from a network point of view is important when you look at the infrastructure overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. On this top box here, what's important to understand is that organizations have different strategies. A lot of them I'm talking to nowadays are really pushing towards using an IT service manager or an IT operations manager. ServiceNow is a great example where they want all changes documented through ServiceNow. So you have tickets and incidents and things, everything is documented. And if all of that process is manual, it's really going to slow you down. So if you have a way, and Gluware can do this, and that automatically open up an incident and run an audit and remediate the issue and then close the incident. Gluware took an automated action on the network, but you know what? You have a full record of it as you require in your ServiceNow ITSM. You also have DDI. You brought up like, a DNS change or a DHCP change, or where are you storing your variables like your IP addressing or your VLAN assignments? And so if that piece of it is manual, you're slowing down your whole process. And so it's important to start to think, automation is what we always kind of refer to. And sorry, I've used my mouse, so it's terribly, it's like my handwriting, probably worse. Orchestration is a key component to think about because you need an orchestrator for the end-to-end process automation. And again, just to mention that, Gluware had a low-code version of this for years. And now with Network RPA, we have literally a no-code drag and drop version. We also serve to orchestrate other technologies. So we've onboarded StackStorm that has 167 and growing adapters to external systems, and we can leverage any Ansible playbook. So when you have some investment in Ansible or you have some playbooks that do things that are worthwhile, we're not saying, throw out the old or move away from an approach you've had. The question is where are you going to invest your time? You don't want to reinvent the wheel with some of these technologies and be building things that are very turnkey already. You want to be doing automation if you're building that's value added. And so I think that's probably a good transition into the next topic here of buy versus build. And this one, we have these conversations a lot because, Gluware is an off-the-shelf automation suite. So we are in the buy category, but there is a misnomer about build, right? And I think that misnomer is a little bit, it's all or nothing. Either I have to buy it or build it, that there's two ends of the spectrum. There's vendor products like Gluware that are just pre-built and it is what you get, and then it's build it. I would argue that there's actually a middle area that people don't realize, and you want to find a product, and Gluware is a good example of it, that yes, it's pre-built, and yes, you have turnkey application, but it's highly extensible. You can integrate APIs, you can jump into our IDE and do low coding, you can do a lot with it. And so if you are going to be in the buy camp, You want to make sure what you're buying is customizable, it's extensible, it's adaptable to your specific environment. And that's what we want to kind of bring out in the theme of this conversation. So when we look at or have these conversations of buy versus build, it's really three key topics or areas to cover: your people, your processes, and your technology. And I'll even throw the bonus one in there on people is like, let's say, culture or organizational approach.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah.
But the people one is the biggest one to assess, because if you have all network engineers like Matt and I who've been trained on Cisco and are get certified in CCIE or whatever, we're very comfortable with CLI. We're not necessarily programmers. And you think, well, I'm going to just convert all my network engineers to become programmers. That might be an unrealistic goal. And we've seen numerous very large organizations with only single-digit success of how many network engineers can become proficient programmers or scripters and actually build technology. So what is that skill set? And then workload's another big one. If your team is already running hot, right, already very busy with the things they're doing, and you're going to layer on asking them to build at the same time, and keep in mind, build is not write a script. It's learn how to write it. It's write it. It's test it. It's maintain it. There's a lot involved.
Secure it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The things that we have after this kind of high level people, process, technology, we're going to dive a little deeper into what it would take to build it. And then understanding your company's history with adopting technology. What has worked in the past, what hasn't worked. If you don't have kind of a proven track record of, let's say, building and rolling things out and adopting, I don't know if it's really realistic to be able to do that. And so the other piece is, insourcing versus outsourcing. If you outsource or hire in contractors who may not be staff that's retained, the problem I see the most with the build approach is that scripting and coding is very subjective. You can write it the way you want to. You can handle variables differently. You can handle lots of things differently and get a similar outcome. But when you ask another programmer or scripter to take over someone else's work, you might as well you're basically always going to be starting from scratch. So if the build resources don't stay with the company or don't document it extremely well, or there wasn't some standard of how you implement, you're going to be restarting the program as soon as that resource leaves or moves on. So that's a really painful experience that has driven a lot of companies more towards the buy piece of it. On the process side, this is also really important as well, because when we start talking to companies and really dig into how well things are documented or how well things are the process is in place, a lot of companies admit that they don't have great processes. And you have to have well-defined processes to automate it. Otherwise, you're going to spend a lot of your time in those beginning stages of building the processes, just defining the requirements and defining what needs to be built. This could be months of effort within companies where potentially if you were buying, you could be implementing or already like enjoying the benefit of automation if you're not already at a very well, process definition defined. Matt, how across people and process, where are you seeing kind of some of those biggest challenges in some of the organizations you work with?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a lot of it well, Mike. We'll get into talking about the organization and the technology, right? But I do think that it's culture, right? And I think that the challenge many times that we see on the build side is that it kind of gets treated as sort of a pet project, right? And you do a little bit here and do a little bit there, right? And you add to it over time, and hey, that might work out for some tasks, right? But it's not getting you any further down your journey, right? And then the flip side of that, right, is that you have one guy or two guys, to your point, that have been charged with just writing all of this stuff from scratch. Yeah. What happens when they leave, right? If you disable their user account, is the automation still going to run? Do you want it to be running, right? So the build, I think, inspires a lot of soul searching. It's probably the best way for me to put it, in questions to ask when we're kind of looking at things from a bigger picture standpoint. Yeah,
fully agree on that. And then the technology, and like you said, I think upper layer managers, everyone acknowledges automation is important and that there's tremendous benefit to things that are repeated should be automated. But I think too often from the top level, and I finally am starting to see this change over the last 2 years or so, where automation initiatives are on the CIO, CTO's top 3 or 5 list because have become so important. And like you said from the beginning, the impact of the pandemic has kind of forced that action to be there. And that, when you didn't have people in the office and hands on keyboards, or you could just send people out to a site, now you got to do things remotely. Automation needs to be in place. And so having the management level have an objective and to be supporting automation from the top level down is really important, because then you just don't get into, well, they're doing automating, they're writing some scripts on their own, and they're not taking it organizationally seriously. And so when you do dive into the technology, and again, we see this a lot because there's a lot of manual, a lot of cut and paste, a lot of, well, my monitoring tool has a little bit of automation, or, hey, we have, name that legacy product. Like there's a lot of old ones out there. I could name drop them, but, I'll avoid it for now. But just to say that they were called they're called network config and change management tools. Most of those had an old approach where they just kind of took the CLI that you wrote and just push it out. There's not a lot of pre-check, post-check, a lot of verification. And so there's risk to the tool set being used. And, when you and I were prepping, we were talking about, how DevOps has had a lot of success. And so sometimes within organizations, they just say, hey, we're lending you a DevOps guy, and he's going to tell you how we use Jenkins, and we have a whole automated pipeline. And, that doesn't apply. The concepts can apply. And I would advocate for that.
Absolutely.
But the technologies don't really apply, because DevOps is developing software, and you're deploying on common compute architectures, or maybe on containerization, a very standard like lower layer. Whereas the networking layer, you have so many different variables and the different CLI and semantic to speak to each one of these vendor operating systems. The majority of technologies in your network don't have programmatic interfaces. So therefore, there's a lot of challenge with that. So a DevOps approach of develop, test, deploy, monitor, and rinse and repeat, and kind of get into a really good CI/CD approach is great, but it's extremely rare where there's use cases where you can integrate or actually automate the network. Now, some of our most advanced users are actually taking a CI/CD pipeline and then automating API calls to Gluware to actually accomplish the network change that's required for an app deployment. And so we are integrating with products like GitLab, or there's others out there that are literally making API calls to Gluware. So Gluware or an automated component could be a part of a pipeline development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say, on that perspective as well, from more of a DevOps standpoint, when you're, laser focused on, applying that methodology to applications that you're writing, if something goes wrong, that might be a bad day for that app, right? Yeah. But, when we're looking and talking about the criticality of the networks these days and talking about risk, automation introduces risk in terms of when you're building it yourself, right? You are the support mechanism. There's no one to call when it goes wrong. And, without some of that validation and really understanding, you're talking about an extremely vast blast radius as opposed to what might happen in the context of just an application or two.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like the bonus one here is around organization and organizational approach and tolerance. And, in the prep, Matt and I were talking about, I hear a lot of things from big companies like, my organization moves slowly, or my organizational culture is like one of cost savings. So you kind of start to hear pushback from folks who, let's say, would advocate automating technologies, but they're feeling like, the business is already, not going to be approaching it well. And so that's where it does take an approach of being very data driven, having the information to take to management to build the business case, where you can present options for automation around preventing outages. So our organizations that are cost sensitive, an outage typically is a very expensive event, right? If an outage disrupts business, disrupts taking orders, transactions, a manufacturing environment, that's extremely expensive proposition to an organization. So a small investment in automation could help improve uptime, reduce those outages, or eliminate, human error that could be causing some of these things. It's pretty easy to begin to turn the table on, or build the business case on how automation could help the overall organization and get buy-in from that. So, and you talked about a little bit about being risk averse. Is that it is ironic to me that organizations are risk averse, but they will let someone home write a script, right, and run it on the enterprise network. That sounds really risky to me, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you and I, in the next slide, we'll get into a little bit more in that. What are the role-based access and controls and protections you have on any homegrown automation? So let's just get right into that. And that one of the Gluware solution architects who worked for a major NEM helped build automation for them, for numerous customers. And he built this slide for us talking about, all the brown boxes are all pieces that you would need to build if you are really going to be serious about building. So I think it's a little short-sighted to think homegrown automation is writing a script. I think homegrown automation is building a software company within your company. And if your core competency as a company is delivering healthcare, or you're in oil and gas, or you're a retail manufacturer, or whatever it is, your core competency is not a technology company where it's realistic to expect your operations team to build software inside the company. Because you have to be able to build the automated engine that makes the changes. You have to build the engine that captures the inventory. You have to present some sort of user interface or API. You have to implement access control. You have to have the ability to troubleshoot when things go bad. You might want to topology or visualization of what's happening, and you need API integration. And all of this needs to be kind of orchestrated and controlled. And Matt, I love your comment about this one. Maybe you could just say it. So.
Yeah, I think it's great, right? It captures, so many things to think about, right? I'd almost stick a big box over top of all of this, because I guess I'm that guy today, is security, right?
Yeah.
In today's age, right? Every piece of this needs to be who's doing the vulnerability checking, who's making sure, I have a database. Is my code, susceptible to a SQL injection attack, right? So, that's a big one for everyone.
Absolutely. So just that, to complete the Gluware pitch, right? In build versus buy, with a product like Gluware, you get, 98% of this out of the box. It is the automation engine. You have the inventory, you have pre and post check validation, full UI, full published API, role-based access control, deep level of logging and debugging. We have a brand new app we announced at Cisco Live this year called Gluware Topology. Build your topology. You can generate site diagrams. The piece that we don't have is simulation, but what we find, or what we use internally, something like EVE-NG, you could build a simulated environment and do pre-testing. If you're a pure Cisco shop, there's a Viral is out there. There's some of these simulation environments that are good, and we highly recommend that in the development and test of applications to use those types of environments. And then, prior to rolling out, or have a test lab that has example devices and components that you have in the network. But man, it's kind of night and day. And we had very large organizations take 2.5, 3, 4, 5 years trying to homegrown all of this stuff and just come back around because it is too hard. So running a little short on time, we'll pick up the pace in these last two segments. Let's jump into the 5 things to avoid. A little bit covered in the last slide, but I've seen this a lot where writing a script or writing automation is a certain amount of work. And, what is often not factored in is tripling that work by having to write the pre-checks and the post-checks and the validation that you need to go into it. If you write a change component and that thing fails because you didn't pre-check or post-check, that is Matt and I were joking a little bit. I picked it up from a colleague I worked with. He called it a RGE, a resume generating event. If you cause your business out downtime through not implementing this, and I work with folks who are very capable of doing it, but they said just the overhead of writing all the pre-checks and posts is not worth it. So I'd rather buy it. I don't want to code work that's undifferentiated. So that's a key one there. 4 for me is implementing siloed solutions. And so this is about the thing that happens a lot within organizations of being short-sighted or maybe wanting to save a bit, and you pick one product to solve one issue, right? Or maybe you even build it. And you haven't thought through, well, what happens when we acquire a company and we add a new vendor, or what happens when something changes? If you implement single solution, you're going to really have that tools sprawl problem, either purchased or built. And you really need to think through your organization and how that can affect you and how a technology could be used across your organization. So it's a big one. Next is, I talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but having the notion where, well, if I buy a solution, I get what the vendor delivers, and yes, it's no code, but I'm locked into what they have. And I would say that's kind of a true perception of a lot of the vendors who make hardware that deliver software. We can name some of them, but we all know the top networking vendors. When you choose those networking vendors, automation solutions, generally for the ones built for enterprise, they are prescriptive. They work the way they're designed, and you have to use them greenfield only or kind of from the start. And so you have 2 big kind of constraints on you. You have to do it our way, and you have to have done it from the beginning, right? And so with those constraints, people are often, doing homegrown or rolling out without automation, and now can't go back and ever even implement it because it won't fit, and they have to kind of redeploy the network. On the other end of the cycle, right? Yeah, it is a vicious cycle. On the other end of the spectrum is the full coding method. I'm going to go curate. I'm going to go find playbooks. I'm going to go research Napalm and Rancid and Jinja templating and all the things that are out there, because there's a lot of tools out there, and you're going to go fully build. And I would say having a building skill set is extremely important, but you want to use your resources that can do that on value added automation. Do the value added integrations, make 2 islands talk to each other via API, or leverage or back up things into a code repository like Git or something like that. Like, do something value added for your organization versus kind of building. And so I'll just say a product like Gluware, and there's others that have kind of ability to extend, to expand, to develop. Gluware has a full-blown IDE called Gluware Lab. You can write your own API integrations. You can customize data models. You can really make it your own so it's not just a no code or all code. So just think about that as you start to approach this space. Also, this is a big one, and Matt was agreeing with me when we ran through this materials around creating automation that's not democratized. And this is really the root of the problem, which is, Joe, who wrote the script, is the only one that can run it and make the change. So if Joe's not here, if Joe took PTO, or Joe is sick, and this is another one that the pandemic shined a light on this problem within organizations, because people got sick and were out of the organization for a long time. Also, people made career changes. So you had people, 20 years in organizations and running automation that said, I don't like this anymore. I'm changing my lifestyle, or whatever may happen. If the automation you're building doesn't have role-based access control and allows the team to use and run that automation, this is really a limiting factor as to how effective it is. Matt, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, I like your point. As we kind of talked about, a lot of this stuff, Mike, that in that vein, unfortunately, automation becomes an exercise of futility, right? Because you're not solving any problems, you're creating new ones and sort of moving the problem around, right?
Absolutely. And so just the number one, again, we're running a little bit up on time. I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll keep moving forward. But creating technical debt as you implement your network automation. Technical debt is something that hangs over network engineers, because things, you deploy things in the network and you think it's going to be there for 4 or 5 years and then you refresh, but things stay in the network an extremely long period of time. I worked at IBM where we had Token Ring and FIDI and all this old stuff that was supposed to go away. And it didn't go away for a very long time, so creating technical debt as you automate, meaning, you have scripts or you have stuff that's not well documented. You're kind of adding on open source after open source. And all these things have to be version controlled and get patched and get updated. The management and the debt that you accrue as you build automation is something very painful. If you at least have a vendor or a partner to help you manage those things, help you implement, help you understand, help you avoid using something that has a vulnerability, so it's going to cause your organization a lot of pain. Being very conscious about technical debt you might introduce into your network is a really key thing. So we have one main topic left and we have 3 minutes to stay on time here. We'll hit it pretty quick. Calculating ROI. So this gets into the business value or building a business case to justify automation. And I have it broken down into, I think, 3 key categories. So hard savings or real dollar cost savings. I already talked about this one, but if you are able to reduce or eliminate outages, this is real savings. Because if you look at your company's history and you look at outages and how many happen a year or a month, and if you're able to document what outages cost your company and you're able to reduce or eliminate that, it is real savings to the bottom line of the business. Reduction of or elimination of other tools. And so this is when Gluware comes in that when we do the discovery and we understand what tools are being used, we know immediately that several of those can be eliminated. You can eliminate the maintenance of those. You can eliminate the cost and or licensing and really kind of consolidate. So reducing other tool sets is one. Reducing or eliminating headcount. And this one, Matt and I were talking about, it's a real sensitive thing. You don't ever want to say like automation takes jobs. But what we always say is like, you want automation to enable your highly technical and highly qualified staff to do differentiating work, to do work that adds value. If you take a highly educated and CCI and say, hey, go apply this change to 1,000 routers at 2 a.m. because we don't have automation, and you're the guy that, yes, you designed it, but now you have to go implement it. That's not a lot of fun, right? And so, but if you're hiring a bunch of people and have to maintain staff or contractors to do low level work, that's an overhead to your business that you don't necessarily need. And so oftentimes the headcount reduction is more around the contracted side or the outsourced side. And this is a big one for us as we work with very large enterprises. Reducing the outsourced cost on changes is a big one that we can help them, cut down quite a bit when implementing automation. We'll hit these last 2, and then we'll get to our call to action. But soft savings around time savings, and this one is very, it's still very real benefit to the organization. But if it takes 6 people 6 months to upgrade the network, and now one person can do it in under 1 month, that is true savings to your organization, and you get a lot of savings from even accomplishing that job, and even being able to move resources from babysitting the wide area network to accelerating your data center growth. You can move important resources from one project to another. And then organizational gains, passing and remaining compliant, increasing that uptime and performance and capacity. The importance of the job satisfaction, reducing mundane tasks and keeping people challenged with new technology areas. So if you do engage with Gluware, we can help you with very, very deep, in-depth ROIs and analysis based on what you have today. So we'll skip through some of these ones. We don't have a lot of questions submitted, so we'll just move right into here. We're at the top of the hour. We want to thank you very much for your interest in this. If this material was valuable to you, we encourage you to reach out to us and let us know what else you'd like to see. We're looking at a series to dive deeper into some areas. Matt and I can talk for hours and hours and hours. Right? We already have been. But you can reach to us at peopledriven.com or gluware.com. And also you see the emails here. But we want to thank you for attending and ask that you reach out to us and let us know how we can help you on your automation journey. Matt, any closing words?
No, I just thank you, Mike. for inviting us here today and giving us the opportunity to present about some great technology along with you.
Excellent. So we're very excited to help you guys accelerate your automation journey and show how it can bring value to your organization. At this point, we'll conclude the webinar, and thank you all for attending. Thank you very much.